Hey everyone, welcome to Group Text. Sometimes there's something that comes along that I can really relate to. Today, my guests are Jenn Hildreth and Aimee Leone, who is the SVP of Talent Relations at Fox Sports, which is a whole different thing we're going to talk about off the record about who's difficult, who's nice, who's not, but that's a separate conversation. For many women, balancing a career and family responsibilities can feel like running a marathon. And for some women, the career is running a marathon. Jenn and Aimee have written a new book, Tough as a Mother, Women in Sports, Working Moms, and Shared Traits That Empower Us All. They are here to talk about what they've learned about balancing life, family, work, and everything else through interviews they conducted with women from across professional sports. Jenn and Aimee, welcome to Group Text.
Hello.
Hi. So first of all,
Thank you.
how do you guys know each other? How'd you meet?
I feel like we need a better origin story, but it's still pretty good. I actually Aimee had a brief foray as an agent in her career in sports television, and I was interviewing for a new agent as I am a broadcaster. And she was in my final two, and I actually didn't wind up picking her, but I loved her, and we stayed in touch. And then with her work at Fox and my getting the opportunity to work on FIFA Women's World Cups for Fox, we would cross paths again that way.
So you can tell me she's not listening. Close your ears, Aimee. Did you pick the right
Never.
agent? Did you pick the right agent?
You know what I did because Aimee left the industry not long after that. So it would, and now
I
we can
did.
just be friends and co-authors together.
Yeah. So
And- But when we met, we found that we were always drawn to two things. And today, since Jenn has curly hair, I can talk about this, but we both have curly hair and we talked about the struggles of that. And then we talked about working mom struggles. And it was really interesting because it just happened organically, but we realized pretty quickly the power in sharing.
so Aimee, you weren't technically a journalist, but with this book, I want to call you a journalist. How did you guys come up with this idea? Because there's a million books about how to be a mom, how to balance, how to do this. What made you figure out that telling the story through women's sports was an interesting and new way to approach it?
I think, again, building off of the conversations that Jenn and I connected over, there was something there that we both realized we needed. And nobody was giving other people like how to advice, right? And it wasn't oh, you need to do this. And we're never positioning ourselves as experts. But we realized that there's so much power in sharing and giving a little bit of a peek behind the curtain to remind each other that you're not alone. And this was a book that we would have wanted when our kids were younger. And it didn't exist then. Half a generation later, it didn't exist when I needed it. Half a generation later, when Jenn would have needed it, it wasn't there. And we found it's still not there now. So we decided to give it a shot.
So,
But
Jen, oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, Melissa, I was just going to say, but I'll jump in for the sports part because I do think that's what makes ours really unique. And I mean, it's the world that we have both lived in. I was an athlete. Aimee wasn't. She'll be the first to say that, but she has worked in sports and around sports her entire life. I still cover sports. So I think we were seeing examples on a daily basis of what some of these traits look like, these tough mother tenets, what we call them in the book. And we realized these are the same things that we were seeing for ourselves trying to survive as working moms. Like there's a lot to be compared between these tough athletes and the toughness that it takes to be a mother. So I think that's how we settled upon the final product.
Because it's very interesting from that point of view. Because
Mhm.
I I wasn't a top flight athlete, but I was an elite athlete at an amateur level, never a professional level. My son played college lacrosse, so I was also a sports mom. I mean, it continues. Plus, I had obviously had a working mom. I was a working mom. All those
Mhm.
kinds of things. Um, Jenn, did you play soccer as a
I did.
kid? Is that how this started?
I played all sport. I played any sport I could get myself into as a kid. I mean, really, let's probably give kickball the real origin there. But yeah, no, I played everything. And soccer, basketball, and track were my three I was around. Yeah.
And Aimee, did your kids play sports?
Thank you for not making me say again that I didn't, but I didn't. But yes, my kids both played sports. They played soccer. I still don't know what offsides means.
Please do not ask me about icing in hockey.
Right.
I just cannot get my head around it. I really can't. I also
Mhm.
can't understand the timing in soccer and additional time. Like, it's just too much for my brain.
Mhm.
Um, how did you realize it was time for this book?
Aimee, you want to take that one?
Well, when we realized it still wasn't out there and that people needed, and it is something for me with my kids older and it's that whole if you can see it, you can be it kind of thing. People at work would always ask me, what's it like balancing family and career? How do you do it? Do you have tips and tricks? So it was always something that we like to talk about. But I had lunch with a friend of mine, um, Seth Davis, who's I was going to say a writer, but maybe I say also a writer.
Yes,
Um,
also a
Yes.
writer.
Also a writer. And he said to me, I was talking to him about the idea of this book, and he said to me, if you don't try to do this and somebody else comes out with this book, how are you going to feel? And that was the kick in the pants that I needed to take it really seriously.
I'm going
And
to
I would have
rewind.
felt, the answer is I would have felt awful. I would have been mad at myself.
I want to rewind a little bit with you, Aimee. How did you get into wanting to be? Because sports, agenting, coaching, it's a very coverage. It's a very still male dominated
Mhm.
field. What made you say, I want to be a sports agent?
It For me, it was just sort of a journey. It wasn't a goal of mine. It wasn't anything in my line of sight. And actually, when I see people that I grew up with, they sort of laugh that I'm in sports and that I've been in it for this long. But for me, I started working in entertainment at NBC in New York. And
Oh,
then,
what did you do?
so I worked for a show. This is dating myself totally, but I worked for a show called Friday Night Videos, which did music videos
Yep.
back in the day. And then we did a show called Saturday Night's Main Event, which was a co-production with the WWE and Dick Ebersol's production company. So I worked with his production company. He co-created Saturday Night Live back in the day. And then we started a show called Later with Bob Costas. And that was all at NBC in New York. And then Dick left to go run NBC Sports. We stayed in touch, and several years later, he called and asked me to come join him there. So that was my entree into sports. I know, highly coveted role, not ever anything I wanted, but it ended up being the best move I ever made.
And I just spent a ton of time over at 30 Rock in the last 2 weeks. It's, I mean, you walk into that building and you're like, wow, this is a lot of the history of television.
Yeah.
Uh, eh, Jenn, how did you transfer going from, or transition is a better word, going from player to commentator? Because
Well,
you have to have a certain personality, because a lot of players try and become commentators and it becomes painful to watch.
it can be. It can be, especially, well, some get thrown right into it and they don't honestly get a lot of training and time beforehand. But I think my role was a little bit different. I knew that, look, my level of athleticism wasn't going to get me a career anywhere. So I was already kind of thinking, all right, what else can I do with this? And I love writing, and being on TV seemed like something that would be exciting and fun to do. So I started off as a writer, covering high school sports, and then just knew I wanted to stay in sports because that was where my passion was. They were fun. I wanted to work really hard on that. I'm sure you understand that with the career path that you have had. When you love what you're doing, you don't mind all the work you put into it. So that's kind of how I made that transition. And yeah, I mean, there's sort of part of your personality that has to be willing to go in front of the camera. And I go back to my little Jenny and Jason show that I had my mom record, and she still has that. And I was elbowing my best friend in the side, telling him to talk. I guess, I kind of knew this was the path I wanted to be on.
So your book approaches mothering, and I know I'm repeating myself, through sports. What do athletes and being a working mom have in common?
More than you might think, right, Aimee?
Well, 9 things
Yes, you
in
talk about the
particular.
9, you call them tenets.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So what are the parallels?
So we found that working in sports, there were things that inspired us about athletes. And I know for me, working on the Olympics in particular, and not being an athlete, have I said that before? Seeing, I remember there was one Olympics where I had this moment of realization of, oh, sacrifice, oh, passion. Those are the things that the athletes are highlighted for, in addition to their athleticism. But I realized that those of us behind the scenes brought a lot of those same qualities to what we do behind the scenes. So Jen and I had so much fun. It was a challenge to narrow it down to 9, but we really wanted to focus on 9 just to tie into the 9 months of pregnancy. But we narrowed it down to these 9 qualities that we felt elite athletes possess that working moms bring to the table every single day. So it's not a sports book. These are inspirational stories and highlighting qualities that we know that every mom, not just working moms, have within them.
It's because it is a lot. And what you're saying about passion and commitment and time is so true. And I love the idea that you did 9 tenets for 9 months. And anyone who's ever had to be pregnant, that's a sport in itself. You know, come on. That's a sport in itself. Surviving pregnancy and childbirth, you are a super athlete. You talk to a lot of moms at different places in their lives of sports. Like one of my favorites, Mary Carrillo. You know, elite athlete, professional tennis player, and sort of, in my opinion, the first big woman commentator.
Mm-hmm.
And has a family.
Yeah.
And no one ever discusses that she has a family, which I think is fascinating. Well, and she was very early on. What did you learn about her journey?
Yeah, I didn't know. I know Aimee knew her better, and I didn't realize that she had a family either. And
That's the thing is nobody knows she has a
yeah,
family, which is fascinating.
yeah. And I think one thing that I learned that really stood out, and she talked about making decisions that were for her family and putting them first, because I agree with you. I mean, Mary Carrillo is one of the most respected. My husband loves tennis. And so hearing her voice in tennis, it became normal to hear a female's voice. And that was a huge thing because that's what we're fighting for in lots of other sports. But she did that. And then to hear that along this journey, when she was starting to get some of these huge opportunities, she had to say no. She had to leave ESPN twice because she just said, I can't do it right now. I need to be here for my kids at this time. And she wasn't really public about that then. But I think her sharing that now, our hope is that shows people, A, you can make those tough choices when you have to, when you got to choose family and put them as a priority. And then that B, if you're good and devoted at what you want to do, at being a mom and your career, whatever it may be, you can keep doing it. Might be a little bit of a curve in the path that you didn't anticipate, but that you can still do it. So I think that's one of the things that stood out from her story for me.
I mean, you have so many amazing people. You have Hannah Storm and Andrea Kramer and Michael Phelps sisters. That had to be hard, being Michael Phelps sisters and constantly being compared to your brother and having to have the same work ethic
Right.
that he
Right.
had.
And they were both swimmers.
Yes, and not get the
elite swimmers.
Yeah, and not get the same adulation, which of course is very much a parallel to women in business.
And they're remarkable humans who have carved their own path, but I'm sure that's both a privilege and a burden, right? Being compared to somebody else in your family. But they talk about very openly their own journeys, and they were not without bumps. They were definitely journeys, and they each redefined what having it all looks like. And that's something else we say, like a big question that people ask is, can you have it all? What is all? And what is all to you and your family at that moment in time? And that, as you know, that changes all the time.
It changes all the time. One of the things I also was thinking about, and it makes it a very modern take on all this. Every generation is raised differently as to what being a wife and mother looks like. what our grandparents, I mean, especially my poor grandparents, even when my mom was growing up, you were not supposed to have a career. And then my mom had a career, and there's a whole generation of women that had careers. Then you couldn't have a career and a family.
Right.
And now you can have a career and a family. And it's interesting when you look through sports, just the respect level of women athletes and women broadcasters has seemed to have followed that same trajectory. How much is this just a generational shift? Or I guess it would have to be a generational shift, but how are you seeing that more in the areas where you guys work?
I think for me, it is a generational shift, but there's also some intentionality there where we are intentionally, if you see her, you can be her. And we're putting women more in these positions that people can see that this is possible. So for me, doing play-by-play in sports, that's the Al Michaels of the world. These are these male voices you've heard over the years, and now you're starting to see some more women in that. So I believe that I can do it. And I think similarly, all these athletes who your mind is blown watching them have children and then come back and compete at the highest level. I mean, Dara Torres, thinking about what she did, coming back to swim at the Olympics in her 40s as a mom. I mean, just so incredible. And there's more and more examples of that. And I think I see that in soccer. I cover a lot of soccer, the NWSL now. You're seeing more women come back and do it because A, they see others show that it can be done. And B, there is more institutional support for it in places that there were not always. We have executives in the book who talk about making their workplace comfortable for working moms. So if you need to get up and leave, you're not going to get a side eye from somebody that you're not doing your job. In the NWSL now, there's a new collective bargaining agreement, WNBA too. They all have more and more maternal protection. So it's not just this rah rah, yay, we can do it because we see people do it. It's being able to help institutionally have more support to make it feasible because that's really important.
And by the way, it's on an aside, it's very funny that you brought up Al Michaels because one of my early jobs was working for Lila Michaels, who Al's mom, who was a big talent booker.
Oh,
okay. Wow.
And she said that when Al was little, he used to open the refrigerator and announce what was in the refrigerator, which I think is hilarious. But what it brings me to is you also talk to family members of working sports mom. The two daughters of Christy Pierce Rampone, gold medalist in soccer, sports commentator, and they're old enough to be able to have these conversations. What were their observation about how their mom balanced work and family? Like, I know what my answer is. What did they learn?
Well, I think the reason we did that was that we wanted to share through the eyes of the children that, yeah, there were some things that were tough, right? My mom missed this, my mom missed that. But I think the general theme through all of them, and we did interview our own children as well.
Oh, that had to make them super happy. How old are your children? How old are your children?
Mine are two teenage girls, 14.
Oh, yeah, that went well.
And, yeah, and mine are adults. Mine are 33. He just turned 33, and she's 28.
So it became a therapy bitch session of everything you did wrong?
We did. I'm not going to lie. We did through this process. We did have a little bit of that. And there's one acknowledgement in there where my daughter claimed this narrative. She's the younger one, claimed this narrative of he got everything I didn't get. And then we found this video of her in the pool and splashing around and jumping and toys and all the things that she had during her childhood and the things we all did together. And we showed it to her and she paused and she said, "Oh, I guess I did have a happy childhood." It's like, yes, dear. Yes, you did. But we wanted people to hear from the children that said, you know what? Yeah, my mom wasn't there for certain things, but when she was there, that was really impactful. And we knew how busy she was. And when she made it a point to be there, that was meaningful. And seeing her now, seeing my mom work, seeing my mom be the badass that she is, like there was a lot of pride in that. So I think the good definitely outweighed some of the tough things.
Jen, two teenage girls, this just does not sound fun. But what about interviewing your kids? Did you have to bribe them? I got to bribe. My son's 24, and I have to bribe him to this day to do anything.
I mean, we do talk about bribery as a totally fine option to erasing mom guilt in the book. Like you missed stuff, you brought stuff, you brought a little toy. Yeah, okay.
100%.
We
I was
support that.
raised by a woman who bribed me all the time, and I think I bribe my son by holding things hostage. Like there's a rug he wants that
Yeah.
I'm not using anymore. I'm like, well, you're going to have to come to the house and get it. Like I'm holding the rug hostage.
Yeah, it's just all
Whatever works.
things work.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But they both were. We did it differently. So I interviewed your kids, right? Aimee, were you for both of those?
I was on, but you did the talking.
So we kind of flipped it around because we wanted them
Yeah.
to be honest. They might not be quite as transparent if it's your mom sitting there like watching you, like, what are you going to say about me? But Amy's kids are older, they could handle it. And my youngest actually opted to be interviewed. So she was 13 at the time, let Aimee interview her over Zoom. And I sat outside the door listening and kind of like sniffling and crying because it was really sweet. And my oldest is much more introverted. She's just graduated from high school this past week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But she wrote hers and then we were able to put that in there. So they actually both are very happy to do it. And again, as Aimee said, like they do say some really wonderful things. And that is what we wanted to give to people, because when your kids are little or they're, maybe in a mood where they're really mad at you for missing stuff or being gone when they want you to be home and make them a peanut butter and jelly, then they're not necessarily going to give you that. Mom, you're doing a great job. But that is what we want to give to people. Yes, you're doing a great job, even in those moments you feel like you're totally failing.
Being a sports mom, and I'm not going to lie and say I was like the best sports mom. I was a little bit of a nightmare sports mom.
We all have those moments. That's okay.
Yeah, he's like, I can hear you. I'm like, why are you focused on hearing me when you should really be looking at the ball? Which was never really an appreciated answer. And then we used to take turns yelling for each other's kids. So when they would say, like, I could hear you, I'd be like, oh, no, that was Mrs. So-and-so. That wasn't me. We used to just pass the buck. But what hit home for me, it was nice to feel like I was not the only one who was not bringing orange slices. And I had to answer emails, and I would be on the phone sometimes on the sidelines. And I'd look at the other moms with the cookies and all that, and I felt a lot of less than. And that was very hard for me. So I ended up, and I felt horrible about it for a long time, saying, but it ended up just being honest. I will pay for the after game meal, but I can't organize it. And of course, there's some moms that sneer, but most of them are like, that's cool. That's okay. But I would feel awful. I didn't know personally how to cope with it. And I think that's universal for working moms. However, I did turn it into a lesson for Cooper when he once said to me, why don't we ever make something for the bake sale? One, I can't cook. I can't bake. Yeah, we could go buy something, but I don't want to do that. So I used it as an economics lesson of supply and demand. That's the supply. We're on the demand side. We here's $2 to go buy stuff at the bake sale. So it was, I look back and realize I came up with that by just absolute sheer panic one day, but it seemed to work. Unfortunately, I've created a consumer by doing that. How do you get, it took me a long time to get past feeling like the shitty mom where I couldn't be on every committee or every group project at school. I would run in the first day and sign up. I would have my calendar and I would mark out those days. And I always was like, happy to be the assistant. I didn't want to be in charge of it. But still, you feel horrible.
Yep.
Where I would be standing on the sidelines of an away game with my rolling bag because I was going from the game to the airport or right from the airport to the game. And I'm standing on the sidelines with luggage. It feels awful. how did you make it feel okay? Because that's not just sports, that's working moms.
Yeah, I would say for me, and Jen and I were just talking this morning about what we were going to say in our conversation with you. Um, and one of the things that really resonated with other people who read the book, who mentioned it to me, and it was something, such an important moment for me in my working mom journey. Um, I separated myself from moms that don't work outside the home, right? And I realize we're all in this mess together and we need each other. And while this is a book for working moms, it's actually a book for all moms. And there was this
100%.
one time when I dropped my kids off, and I talk about it in the book. I dropped my son off at his friend's house, and his friend was like, his khakis were ironed, his shirt was tucked in, and my kid was probably he might have had like chocolate on his face. His kids were definitely wrinkled. His pants were definitely wrinkled. I was probably late, and I blamed it all on the fact that I'm working and that I assumed my friend, whose life looked so perfect from the outside, I assumed she thought that I fell short because I work. So I dropped off my kid. She and I sat outside on the steps and just talked about life and being moms. And it turned out, in our honesty, I was envious of her position. She was envious of mine. I was worried she was judging me. She was worried I was judging her. And it was this beautiful moment of sisterhood and acceptance. And also, I realized the one actually judging me was me. I was my own worst critic, still am sometimes, but I just couldn't keep it all together sometimes. And my friends really helped me. And this one in particular, she was home. So she, through that honest conversation, she offered up, how can I pick up your kids? How can I help you? What do you need from me? And then I would help her on the weekends when she had other stuff. So it was really eye-opening. So I don't know
I
if that answers your
No, it does
question.
answer the question because a lot of it is getting your group around you to trade
Right.
and trade responsibilities. And again, I think that's for any working mom, but like I always felt like my penance of not making the cookies was I was the one that would drive the boys home from
Mm.
practice or a game, which is just awful because they smell so
I was
bad.
gonna say
Okay. And in lacrosse and like a lot of they wear pads
equipment,
and
yeah.
gloves and it is vile. And I had all these rules. You know, you have to bring clean socks and shoes. Yours others have to go. All bags must be zipped. You must put on a clean shirt. Like I had all these rules to do it because I felt like that's how I could give
Yeah.
back.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a yeah. And I kept a can of Febreze in my car. And once it was so bad, I spun around and I literally Febrezed them all in the
Oh
back
my
seat.
gosh, I get it.
I mean, it was rough.
But
Um,
you found a way and you found what worked for you and that I do think that takes time. It takes us going through those emotions, the mom guilt. And I do think that so much of that is self-imposed because we care. We want to be doing what we think is the best job at being a mom. And then also we care about our careers if that's where, trust me, I've been at those games on the sideline with my suitcase ready to go and or I've just had to miss things completely or I've driven overnight so I could go to my daughter's play and then get back to the game I had to go to. So, you figure out a way to do the things that you can do. But I think sometimes, yes, you need that community around you to help because we need to help one another. And someone bring the Febreze and bring the boys home, and the other ones make the bake sale cookies, like that we don't all have to do all the things. But one of our moms, I think it was Andrea Brimmer, who's the CMO of Ally Financial, who is a fantastic leader for her company. And she said, guilt is a useless emotion. And I just sort of had to let that sink in for a minute because I was like, wait, but I feel this all the time. No, it's because I care. But she said, I think it was her, Aimee. I hope I'm not misquoting. It's someone in
Mm.
the book. I think it was Andrea. And just sort of that reminder to yourself, like stop putting so much on yourself all the time. One of the things that one of my girls said to me was my oldest daughter, Ashley. She said, I just wish you would stop trying. You don't need to keep trying to be perfect because you already are. Like what you're doing is great. What the way you're doing it is great. And just even hearing those words was like,
Hmm.
okay, can take a
are
breath.
are either of you Catholic or Jewish?
Mm-mm.
Oh yeah, you don't
Um,
you have a
I was
very
raised by a Jewish father
yeah, that's
and
not the same
grandmother.
level of that's not the same level of guilt. So I'm so impressed that you have such a healthy relationship with it.
Well,
One of the
Yeah.
words you use, and it's one of the tenets, and I love the word moxie.
uh,
It's my
People
favorite.
Jen's
don't really
favorite.
know the clear definition of it. Explain moxie and how this came up in the interviews.
Yeah, I do love it. And to be honest, I had to look it up and make sure that I understood what it meant because I was looking, I think we both were looking for a certain word that would sum up what we were sensing from some of these women that we spoke to. And Moxie being a real strength of character, a determination to persevere regardless of your surroundings. But really, it's a strong belief in yourself and what you stand for. And if you read the women in that chapter, you'll see. I mean, they fit that to a T. And I think reminding all of us that we've got that inside of us. Like, Melissa, I feel like you definitely have Moxie, so you probably don't need to be reminded of it, but some other people do. They need to be reminded that they do have that strength to be able to get through and that their voice is strong and it's worth hearing. Pamela McGee was someone whose story I did not know. And I hope that her story and her words just touch everyone as much as they did Aimee and I, who were she had us rolling on the floor laughing. She had us near tears. I mean, we reached all the emotions with her. And she and her son JaVale were the first mother-son duo to win Olympic gold medals in basketball. And her daughter also played in the WNBA. So just an incredibly accomplished history there. But her legacy as a mom and now a grandma, as she calls it, is
Oh,
absolutely full of moxie.
I always think of moxie like guys and dolls. That girl's got some moxie.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's true, and I think it's one of those underused words. But with one of the things you guys talk about, and you talked about it in the very beginning, was the idea that having it all.
Mhm.
And my mother and one of her friends at one point tried to write a book about you can have it all. And I remember distinctly my mother saying, no, you can't.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How did you two, on a personal level, accept that? No, you can't. I mean, it's something I've gone through. I mean, my son luckily inherited the work ethic. I've got my mom. So to him, seeing a strong working woman was not unusual.
Right.
But how did you find yourself saying it's okay to not have it all? Like I know what I missed. I know what
Right.
parts of my life weren't necessarily fulfilled.
Right. It's prioritizing, right? And what's important at that moment. And again, as we said earlier, what is all at that moment? So can you have it all? Look, my kids are 33 and 28, and we just did this book. Jen and I have wanted to each separately, and then we came together on this, but we each wanted to do a book for years about this. And it's only now that I can. So I had to push that off because it wasn't a priority in certain times in my life. So can you have it all? Ish,
Yes.
maybe,
Actually, see, I
Ish.
would say yes. But
but you've
I think
just got to, yeah,
ish is the right word, and what
yes,
is having it all in that moment.
right,
yes.
Do you
right.
think women face that pressure, especially in a professional situation, especially in sports? Men don't get it.
Yeah. Read Jessica Mendoza's story. I just listened to hers in the audiobook, so it's fresh in my mind. But she tells this really compelling story about how it was when she was covering one of the times she's been covering Major League Baseball, and she was in a manager's office, and she walked in and he said something to her, like, how do you do it? How do you leave your kids like that? And she said that just the wording of the question really got under her skin. Like, what do you think, I'm leaving them on the side of the road? I no, like I've took care. And then she looked around his office and saw a picture of him and his children. And she said, well, you've got kids. What, does anybody ask you that question? Why are you asking me and not asking it of yourself? And he said, well, it's different. I'm a man. And then of course they had a heated discussion, as Jessica tells it. But I do think there is a different type of feeling and pressure that women have. Some of it is self-imposed. I just had this discussion the other day with some of my friends. Some of it, we wouldn't have it any other way because that is kind of how we're made up, and we want to be everything to everyone. So it is understanding you can't always do that, but that have it all question, I do think the definition of all is where you can determine yes or no. And so we've had, like, Pamela McGee said, no, you can't have it all. But what she meant by that was my house might not always be clean. Okay. You might get a, waffle for dinner one night because I didn't have time to cook. Okay, I'm okay with that not being my all. But if my all is I want to pursue my career and be really great at it, and I want to be a mom and be as great as I can be at that, hell yes, that you can do. If that is what you consider having it all, it can look different to everybody, but you better believe you can do it. And there's my athlete coming out, I think.
I
And
absolutely.
I think another thing that we found that we want everybody to remember is it is not going to be perfect. And that's okay. And what we wanted them to see and find comfort in is if a 12-time Olympian, if a Hall of Fame broadcaster, if a WWE champion, if they can show you their imperfections, our hope is that every mom can sort of breathe a sigh of relief and know that it's not just them kind of trying to figure out their way through this balance or synergy, as one of our moms called it.
It's so interesting, and Aimee, and especially because you came up in a world that was so male dominated on the representative and broadcasting end of it. I know for me, because I have one son, he played on obviously a boys team, and I ended up traveling with this group of men because the dads would take the boys, and I ended up being the conduit for all the moms who weren't there because the dads wouldn't answer their phone and give them the scores and this.
Mhm.
So all the moms at the games, I was the one saying so and so just scored or whatever it was, or telling them what happened, and when one of their kids got hurt, how he was really feeling. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that was how I found I made myself useful
Hmm.
in that situation. And that was because I was dealing with a whole group of men. Aimee, it had to be so hard to negotiate through the sports world as an executive, which is really all boys and very much still stuck in it in a way.
Yeah, I think it's a lot less. There are so many more women, and here we have so many, which I love seeing because they're all younger than me. So I sort of take pride in some way, hopefully paving a way. But I was also really fortunate in that I had really supportive bosses. Dick Ebersol, as I mentioned, at NBC Sports, his wife, who's also in the book, Susan St. James, she's a strong woman and she was a working mom and she was supportive. So I always had an ally in that. And that was really helpful. Now, look, I'm also really hard on myself and really driven. So the big holiday concert I never made, I prioritized the things I needed to be home for. And this was way before hybrid working and Zoom calls and all of that stuff being acceptable. This was back in the day when you had to commute in and you had to be there in person and sit up straight and do all those things while wiping baby drool off of the corner of your blazer. But I always had supportive bosses. And as I said, I prioritized what is important at that moment. I don't want if my kid's sick, and I tell one story in the book where I was running out to make the bus into Manhattan, and as I'm hugging my daughter goodbye, she was a little toddler at the time. She decided to see what would happen if she stuck a Cheerio up her nose and breathed in. So I'm like, I'm gonna miss the bus. And I had this moment of like, are you kidding me? I have a meeting. Meanwhile, my daughter's got a Cheerio in her nose, and I needed to sterilize a tweezer, lay her down, calm her down, and get this Cheerio out of her nose. But there was that conflict of, but when I go to work, I didn't do it often, but if I explain the situation, like, what am I going to do?
Does she have a nose
So,
piercing now?
um, she did. She does not anymore.
So this putting her things up her nose is a thing for her.
Who knew?
Poor
Who
Claire.
knew? What's next? There has to be a follow-up. What's next? I know you're just doing this now, but forward thinking.
Oh gosh. We're definitely taking a breath. I mean, it's been wonderful whirlwind, and I just hope we're sharing it. We want to share this because we really hope that it can do some good and help some moms out there. Amy's, I feel like, better at thinking about this than me. I'm just like, oh my God, I need a little break and go back to focusing on my job for a while, and just my job and my family. Aimee, what do you think though? What's coming up?
Well, it's definitely hard. And, we launched this book initially intentionally before Mother's Day. So we focused on this being the great gift for Mother's Day, supporting mothers. And now it's like, okay, Mother's Day is gone. What do we do between now and next Mother's Day, right? What we want to see is similar to Sheryl Sandberg did with Lean In, and having a call to action to create these lean in circles where professional women help professional women, and creating these community groups where you can have conversations, share best practices. We would love to see something like that. Like, is it Tough Mother Circles? So first is getting this book for your book club. And we've been able to get a lot of feedback from people, and I had a call with Seth Davis, called me the other day and said, damn, you guys did something that was so impactful. And he said, I'm a dad. And it gave me this new insight into what working moms go through. He said, I leave, I go to work, I come home, I travel. I don't think about all those other things. And it gave me such insight into what you working moms go through, that he didn't even realize. But so just sharing that information, finding your support group, supporting other people. Like I said, that story on the front steps of my friend's home, she didn't work outside the home. Sharing with each other and not having that divide anymore, and just creating this support for each other, acceptance, self-acceptance, and just having those safe spaces to have the conversations and be reminded that you're not alone.
I smell a workbook. I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it out loud. Book, Tough as a Mother, Women in Sports, Working Moms, and Shared Traits That Empower Us All. It is out now. Aimee and Jenn, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. It is an absolute pleasure.